I want you to think about that one person. You know exactly who just came to mind. The one you've prayed about and then told yourself to stop praying about. The one you convinced yourself was gone for good. But here's what nobody is telling you. You didn't lose them. God moved them. And there is a massive difference. Because there's a pattern hidden in Scripture that most people completely miss. Joseph and his brothers, Ruth and Naomi, the prodigal son. Every single time, distance first, restoration second, separation first, then something greater than what was ever lost. So if you're sitting in a season where someone is gone and it makes absolutely no sense, I need you to hear this right now. The distance wasn't punishment, it was preparation. God didn't remove them to destroy you. He removed them to fix something neither of you could see from where you were standing. And that silence you've been living in, that pain you've been calling the end, it might just be the calm before the most unexpected comeback of your life. Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you is going to completely change the way you see that separation. Now listen closely to this part, because this is where most people miss what God is actually doing. When someone exits your life without warning, your mind tries to turn it into a final verdict, like the story has already been written and sealed. But spiritually, what feels like an ending is often only a pause you don't understand yet. And that pause is not empty. It is structured. There is something happening inside it that you cannot see yet. Genesis 50:20 says, "You intended it for harm, but God intended it for good." That means even the moments that felt like loss were already being redirected into purpose long before you could understand it. Now I need you to sit with this, because what if the separation you've been grieving is actually two processes happening at the same time? One visible, one hidden. You only see the visible one, the distance, the silence, the unanswered messages, the shift in energy. But behind that, there is another layer you don't have access to yet. God working on timing, God working on character, God working on alignment. And this is where the Joseph pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Joseph did not just lose his brothers in a physical sense. He was removed from the environment that shaped his pain. And while he was in the pit, then the prison, something was being rebuilt in him that could not be rebuilt in comfort. There is a version of you that only forms in separation, not in closeness, not in emotional familiarity, in distance. Because distance forces clarity. It removes distraction. It exposes what you were tolerating but couldn't see clearly before. And here is the part that may challenge you a little. Sometimes God does not remove the person because they are the problem. Sometimes He removes the version of you that only existed around them. Let that sink in, because that version of you may not be able to carry what is coming next. Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." Not familiar path, not predictable paths, straight paths, even when the process feels like it is going nowhere. Now I want to bring you back to something important. The question you've been carrying is still alive. Is this really the end of the connection, or is something being rearranged that you simply cannot see yet? Because one of the most overlooked truths in Scripture is that God often prepares restoration in silence long before it becomes visible in reality. Ruth thought she had lost everything when she left Moab, but the distance was the exact path that positioned her for restoration she never imagined. And I need you to notice something here. Every story of restoration in Scripture required a season where nothing made sense first. No explanation, no clarity, just trust, just distance, just waiting. And this is where your emotions may feel stretched right now, because waiting feels like uncertainty, not progress. But what if progress is happening in a place you cannot access yet? What if the delay is not denial, but construction? Because there are situations God does not fix quickly, not because he cannot, but because what he is building requires depth, and depth takes time. Now here is where the tension increases, because if what you are feeling is true, then it means the story is not over yet. It also means something or someone you thought was gone may not be as far from return as it looks. But the sign of that return is not what most people expect. And if you continue with me, I am going to show you what that sign is and why it changes everything about how you interpret silence. When most people reach this point, they assume silence means nothing is happening, but that is where perception starts to fail. Because in Scripture, silence is rarely emptiness. It is often transition, a shift you are not yet positioned to interpret correctly. And I want you to sit with this carefully, because what comes next may reframe everything you've been emotionally attaching meaning to. Let's go back to Joseph for a moment. There's a detail that gets overlooked. Before the reunion ever happened, there was a long stretch where Joseph had no sign that anything would change. No apology from his brothers, no indication of restoration, no emotional closure, just years of uncertainty. But Genesis 41 shows something subtle. Pharaoh has a dream that only Joseph can interpret, and suddenly everything changes in one moment. But here's what most people miss. That moment did not start in Pharaoh's palace. It started years earlier in isolation. So the question is not whether God is working. The question is how long he has already been working before anything becomes visible. And now I want to bring this closer to your situation, because you are not just dealing with distance, you are dealing with interpretation, what you believe the distance means. And that interpretation is shaping your emotional state more than the distance itself. Proverbs 16:9 says, "In their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps." Notice it doesn't say God suggests steps. It says he establishes them, meaning even the path that felt like a detour may have been part of something already structured beyond your awareness. Now let's go deeper. There are seasons where God does not remove people to end connection. He removes access so that transformation can take place without interference. Because familiarity often blocks growth, comfort delays clarity, and emotional attachment often clouds obedience. So the distance you are experiencing may not be about separation at all. It may be about purification of direction. And here is where things begin to feel uncomfortable for many people. Because if God is still involved in what feels like a disconnected situation, then it means nothing about this has been random. Not the timing, not the silence, not even the confusion, which means you cannot afford to interpret it casually. Now let's introduce something deeper. In Luke 15, the prodigal son leaves, but the text never says the father stopped watching. It never says the relationship was erased. It only says there was distance. And during that distance, something was happening in both directions. The son was being broken down by experience, and the father was waiting with expectation. Two processes, one visible struggle, one invisible watchfulness, and both were leading somewhere. Now I want you to connect this, because your situation may also be dual-layered like this. What you are experiencing emotionally is only one layer, but there may be another layer where things are shifting without your awareness. And this is where confusion begins to break down if you look too quickly. Because when nothing changes externally, people assume nothing is changing spiritually. But that is not how divine timing works. Isaiah 55:8-9 says, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord." Meaning the process will often not match your expectation of the process. And this is why people misread delays. They expect movement to look like progress, but sometimes progress looks like stillness. Now I want to go back to something you may not have fully considered yet. What if the person you are thinking about is also in a process you cannot see?
What if the distance is not one-sided?
What if God is working in parallel timelines? Because if that is true, then the question is not just when will they return? The deeper question is, what will they return as? Because nothing returns unchanged after divine processing. Not Joseph, not Ruth, not the prodigal son, and not the story you are currently in. But there is a tension building here, because every pattern we have looked at so far shares one final stage, a moment where everything suddenly shifts without warning, a point where silence breaks, where clarity appears, where what felt impossible becomes undeniable. And Scripture shows a consistent trigger before that moment arrives, a sign that most people overlook until it is too late to miss it. And if you continue, I am going to show you exactly what that sign is, because once you recognize it, you will never interpret your current season the same way again. There is a moment in almost every restoration story where everything looks exactly the same on the surface. No movement, no new update, no visible change. And right before the breakthrough, that is usually when people give up the most. But Scripture keeps showing something consistent. The final shift always begins in silence that suddenly breaks in a way no one can predict. Let's bring this to Joseph one last time. Genesis 41 shows the turning point, but Joseph didn't wake up that day knowing it would be different. Nothing in his environment suggested promotion was near. Yet one conversation changed his entire reality. And the key detail is this: the shift did not start when Pharaoh called him. It started when everything looked like it was still stuck. That is the pattern. Now I need you to connect this to your season, because the question has never just been about distance. It has always been about meaning. What does this silence actually represent? And I want to give you clarity, not confusion, because not every delay is leading to restoration. But there are specific patterns in Scripture where separation is followed by repositioning. And when God is involved in repositioning, nothing about the process feels logical in the middle. Now listen closely. One of the clearest signs that something is shifting is when your emotional attachment starts losing control over your decisions. When you stop reacting the same way, when the urgency begins to quiet down, when your spirit starts leaning toward peace even without answers, that is not you giving up. That is alignment beginning to form. Philippians 1:6 says, "He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion." Not pause it, not abandon it, carry it. Now I want to bring everything together. Joseph's story, Ruth's journey, the prodigal son's return. None of them ended where separation began. Every one of them moved through a process where identity was rebuilt in silence before restoration ever appeared. And that is the part many people miss. What you are calling distance may actually be reconstruction, not of the situation only, but of the people involved. Because God does not just restore connections, He restores capacity. Now I want to speak directly into your thoughts right now. The person you are thinking about is not outside the reach of God, but they are also not outside the process of God, which means even if restoration is part of the story, it will not return the same way it left, and neither will you. Something has to mature first. Something has to settle first. Something has to become ready. And that is why forcing clarity too early never works. Now here is the final layer. In many biblical patterns, the moment of return is not announced, it is recognized. You don't always get warning, you get awareness. You realize something has shifted before anyone explains it. And when that happens, everything that once felt confusing suddenly makes sense in hindsight. But you are not in hindsight yet. You are still in the forming stage. So do not rush what God is still shaping. Do not mislabel what is still unfolding. And do not assume silence is absence. because in the kingdom, silence is often construction. Now, I want to leave you with this. If this message spoke to your situation in a real way, don't keep it to yourself. Comment one word right now: trust. Not because everything is clear, but because your faith is still active in the middle of what is unclear. If you have been feeling this message, like this video, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because this channel is not just about messages, it is about clarity in seasons where nothing makes sense. And share this with someone who is quietly struggling with distance they cannot explain, because what they think is over may actually still be under construction. And if you want, go and watch the next video on this channel. It will continue from this same pattern and show you another layer of what God does in silent seasons. Stay aware, because what feels delayed may already be moving closer than you think.